In this tutorial video, we are going to take a look at how to set up your turbochargers so that your boost curves don't all look like this one. In fact, we are going to make 3 engines with 3 turbos, 3 different turbo setups. And here we have our base engine, beautifully bland, but perfectly solid. So how do we approach this one? Well, quite simple. There are 2 things that you should be doing before trying to apply a turbo, and that is open up the exhaust and lower down compression. And what we can do now is turbocharge it! Okay, by accident somehow it has found a good turbo setup to start with, but let's say you have not found a turbo setup to start with and it looks something like this, or something like this, i.e. more or less naturally aspirated. So what do you do when you start tuning a turbo? Well, we've already done the pre-steps. Now you simply open up the compressor to maximum size. Make it naturally aspirated, more or less. We're going to stay in the 4-split graph mode and going to use that for the entire tuning process. Now that you have your massive turbo that doesn't spool, just go ahead and make your design choices first. So we want to have a standard turbo, journal bearing, and simple boost control. Make sure that your turbine size slider sits somewhere in the middle. Also, now would be a good time to determine how much boost you want to run, at least ballpark figure. Are you going for a super high performance car like close to 2 bar boost? Or are you going for a, let's say, more mediocre standard 0.7 bar? What is that? Like 10 psi or something. Anyway, what you're going to do next from here is very simple. We're going to slide the turbine size down, or turbo size down, until we have something that we like. You see that? That is looking pretty good. Now we went too far. The engine explodes. Undo that, please. And go a little larger. So, if you have backed off a little bit from the explosion, and you're quite satisfied with the look to start with, then you have something that you can continue to tune. Now it is back to the flow utilized graph. We want to get these in order. Well, maybe apart from the intercooler, because the larger the intercooler, the more efficient it is. The yellow line shows you the exhaust. It is ridiculously large, and that was by design, just to make sure that the engine can pop out all that power out of its butt. So now we can close it down again to a more reasonable size, and that is that. You see, when it goes onto boost, it adds a lot of mass flow to it. Also, we are seeing that we are getting a ridiculously low flow through the headers, and that is because somehow it selected tubular race headers instead of what we actually need, which is cast mid in this example. And even those are flowing too well, so let's close them down a tad. Doesn't have to reach all the way up top there, but maybe this. This is looking pretty solid. Intercooler around 50%. Sounds pretty good to me. Very much depends on your application. This one is more like a performance application. And, well, the engine isn't. So we probably can go to more like 80% there without doing any harm. So let's shrink this one down. It will still perform just fine. Nice. In the NA tuning flow, the next thing you would be looking at is the octane or timing map. And that is not quite the case here, because more things will change before we finally give that a tune. We have to take a look at our compressor map. The compressor map shows you how much the compressor flows versus what pressure ratio is on it. The map you see here is how efficient the compressor is at compressing air. And what you do see also is a blue line through here. That is how the engine operates and the path it is going to take through the compressor map. The flat bit up on top here is when it is at full spool, when we are at the boost limit, which is between 2,100 and our maximum 6,200. What we are seeing here in the compressor map is that it is getting really close to the edge where it's becoming horribly inefficient. 49% efficiency, 50% efficiency out there. That makes the turbo run pretty hot. If you want to check turbo temperatures, you can do so right here. And That's the turbo pressure. In this one, you do see that the turbine is working quite hard at the end there. And that is because the compressor is getting so inefficient that it is asking for more and more power from the turbine side. So what do we do about this? Well, there are a few things you can do. For instance, we could change the tune of the turbine AR and the compressor trim. That will shift the whole compressor map a little bit, or tilt the whole compressor map a little bit to the right, towards higher flows. Let's go to 45 and see what that does. There we are, and you see it is a little bit more contained now. Also, what we could do is move up this flat bit by adding boost, but this will not just move it up, but also move it up to the side. And you can see that here. It's actually becoming worse, not better. The only thing that really helps against it flowing too much is making it larger. What you're going to sacrifice, though, is the early spool. Let's make it a little bit larger and then see what we can do to counter the late spool. So make it larger. You see it's getting a lot better now here, with ending in somewhere 67% efficiency instead of the 50. Much better tune. But now we're spooling like 300, 400 RPM later. So let's change that. What we can do is make the turbine smaller. One thing that you might want to check out there is if you go to the normal single graph mode and check out your flows. The turbine flow is shown right there. And that is not really the flow, but the flow at which it is the most efficient is 100%. So we're slightly below that. Making the turbine slightly smaller actually will benefit the turbo overall. When you're making the turbine smaller, you need to make sure that you have enough room to run here in the at the surge line of the compressor map. You want to push this line, the spool line, further to the left in the compressor map, but without getting too much surge. You're not seeing the whole picture of surge here because we are only displaying at the moment the full throttle line. At slightly below full throttle, you will have less mass flow, but the same kind of pressure ratios, and thus you are moved slightly further to the left. So let's make the turbine a little smaller and see what that does. Tooltip's getting in the way, but you're seeing that we are moving down the spool significantly and keeping the end point right there. So now we have achieved what we set out to do. We have made it overall more efficient, and we have even lowered the spool point down to fully spooled at 2000 RPM. That sounds great to me. Now there's only one thing left, and that is the same stuff that we did for the naturally aspirated engine. You don't want to have this ocean map, you do want to have it look proper. And now you need to compromise. Do you want to optimize it for optimal power on boost, or do you want to optimize it for efficiency and lower power? That is determined by compression. So if we go up here and we are going beyond peak torque timing and into this yellow stuff, then this is kind of an optimal tune for power. 152.8 kilowatts. If we up compression further, the engineers are needing to pull more timing out of the timing map to accommodate for that, so that the engine doesn't start to knock, and that will actually lower power. But on the other hand, it makes the engine much more usable in this off boost and off throttle range. So I think we're going for a kind of happy compromise here, and that will be somewhere around this area. Now let's check again how much power we're making. Yeah, we've just sacrificed about a kilowatt. Not bad. And there you have it, a full tune of a standard-ish turbo, with a whole structured flow of things to do. Now there are two more engines that we need to turbo. A carbureted engine, as well as a modern sports car engine. This is the inline six that we made in the other tutorial. Well, this is in 1950. No chance to put a turbo on there. So let's say this has been produced for 30 years. And now they are still running carburetors and want to install a turbo on top. Because it's the 80s. You know the drill from the first engine. Let's open up the exhaust and lower the compression. Now we are ready to turbocharge the engine. And what we need to do is, well, it's so large already. And this slider needs to be about in the middle. It's so large already that it didn't really spool. So, yeah, we're back to naturally aspirated. Now, make your choices for what you want. Standard geometry, well, standard wastegate, all good. We probably with carburetors don't want to have massive amounts of boost. Let's say we are happy with just 0.4 bar. Now, decrease the size until you see it spool. There we go, there it comes. And that looks like a very decent spool point. And I think we can use this. Now, we need to get the various flows in order. The worst offender is the fuel system, the carbs themselves. So let's quickly adjust that. We need larger ones. So drop that down to about 100% up there. That is looking good. Then the second largest offender is the manifold, and we can drop that one in, or make it slightly larger again. That is also looking good now. Now we have the headers, and they are actually cast mid now, which is good. Make them a little smaller to bring it up. That's looking fancy. And now exhaust, way too large, as expected and as wanted. So, there we have it. Now we can go back to the turbo and make a few more choices and optimizations. Let's take a look at the compressor map. What we are seeing is that it is slightly inefficient out there. In fact, we are running the compressor at about 35% efficiency at the peak there. That is absolutely terrible. But what can we do? What can we do to change this? Well, we said we can up the tune slider a little bit, moving us closer. What we also can do is make the compressor larger. And I think here we actually need to. Being so low in boost doesn't make for a very happy turbo, does it? But if we make it larger like this, we are at least moving into somewhat acceptable territory. If we were using a little more boost, we would be in a more optimal area. But on the other hand, that kind of destroys the rest of the engine as well. Because with carburetors, in an easy way, you can only tune for either being on boost or being off boost, and the rest needs to suffer. Now that we are somewhat happy with where we are in this map, at the end point, we can start to tune for spool. Because that is, while it's the absolute numbers aren't too bad, 2,700 RPM in 1980, it can be a lot better than this. So what we're going to do here now is, we have a lot of space around here on the left-hand side of the compressor map. We can lower turbine size. So let's do that until we are happy with this. There you go. There you go, some more. And that is looking almost like a... Oh, did I actually reduce that one? I didn't mean to. So that is looking very fancy. Almost to the point where it would say this is a little too good. So full spool at 1,700 RPM. Yeah, it's just 0.5 bar, but overall very solid. No issues whatsoever. Slightly too large intercooler. Let's change that. And for this lazy engine, I think we can go to 100%. Doesn't really hurt it. And now that we're happy with the compressor map, as well as all the other things, we take a look at the ocean once again. I think we can up the compression a little bit and see what happens then. And probably do want to go, because this is a lazy engine, a little bit higher. Yes, into the warnings. That is acceptable. There. All right, that loses us power at the top, but it gains us overall fuel efficiency in the middle throttle range at lower RPM. I'd say mission accomplished. That is a beautiful build. Let's get to the last one. Ah yes, the sports car engine. You know what we need to do? open up the exhaust, lower the compression, look at the ocean, and enjoy. At that point, we can add the turbocharger, and beautiful. We see another example of things that can go wrong. Fireworks. That is a very dangerous rocket. That is just because the turbo is way too small. We are running a single turbo setup here. So, first thing, and I always say you need to do, open up the compressor to maximum size. All right? That is actually not that small for this engine, at least for one turbo. We do want to run a twin turbo on this one. It is a V12 after all. And then we don't spool at maximum size. That's good. Now we do want to make our various design choices. This engine is of course running smart boost, it's running lots of intercooler. We're going to reduce this later. I think variable geometry, yes, let's take that one on. And ball bearings, sure. I believe we should be aiming at 2 bars of boost, because we're using fancy internals that should be able to take that. And now, the next step is just to reduce turbo size. Aha! We're running into other problems, I see. And that is valve float. So this is about as good as we can make it with this. Right there, that is valve float. That is because we are running so much boost that the valves are just blown open. That is actually another thing that you can do as a precaution before you install anything that is a performance turbo. Stiffen up the springs. Alright, this is looking great, but it has revealed another problem. Well, let's start over. Let's make it a massive turbo and see what happens. So going down. Yeah, we're starting to see some performance curve coming up there. And boom, it goes. Why does it go boom, you ask? Well, it is in surge. In surge means that we are starting to spool too early. How can you spool later? Previously, we have only answered the question of how do you spool earlier. The answer was by making the turbine size smaller. How do you spool later? Well, you do the opposite. You make the turbine larger. So let's do this. Just make it maximum size and then slide up again until you can actually spool this thing. Yep, about there. And if you really want to adhere to the theme, always start to go from the top down. Now we have noticed this mistake. Now we do another slide down in the range and see how far we can progress before things get dicey. That was there. Okay, now we are at this point. How do we make this turbo now better? It does achieve what it's supposed to. It has 2 bars of boosts. It holds it from, what is that? From 5,000 to 9,200. That's solid. But you see some problems. Those problems are not necessarily in the flow, but let's correct those first. We do see that probably the header is a little undersized. Easy fix. Just slide it down a tad and that should be good. Now the flows are okay, apart from the intercooler, which is massively oversized. Let's move it to 50-ish%. And what do we do next? Well, next up is the compressor map. In this case, it is a variable geometry turbo that is making our lives a little harder by being super good at spooling early. That is why we can use a much larger turbine size, which also allows us to flow a lot more through the turbine at the high end. And now, this turbo is getting to very, very low efficiencies. It is also getting very close to breaking. What can we do about this? Well, we can always start tilting over this a little bit, tune a little bit. So let's go to 60 or something. Yeah, look at what happened there. I think this is already pretty close to what we actually want. But instead of making it just about changing the tune, we could go 2 ways. We can make the compressor larger to contain this a little bit in the green area, and then see what we can do by lowering the turbine. As you see there, we are running into surge stress, but we are getting a little earlier spool, but this is a little close to the line. too close to the edge. So surge stress 7%-ish, that's fine. I think this is actually a pretty solid build. Can eke out some more spool by just making the turbo overall smaller, but you are running into some inefficiencies up there. But I think this is decent for a 2-bar build without using any quality. As soon as you add quality, you get rid of all those problems because your turbo is just so much more versatile and can take it. This engine and this build would massively benefit from a 2-stage turbo, so probably a quad turbo setup, sequentials on each bank, but that is not what we are discussing here, is it? So I think I'm happy with this one. Now, last thing, the ocean. We do have a problem here though. It's an ocean and it's an island. And it is perfectly up to you to decide how high you want the island to be and how shallow you want the ocean to be, or how deep you want the ocean to be. This setup that we have right here is pretty much perfect for high performance. If you want to go a little bit more, let's say, optimized for something else than driving at full throttle and maximum RPM, then you can get it down and even go as far as to something orange and red. It's quite common for turbo engines that they have to pull a lot of timing out of that just to make normal driving more bearable. I think we have arrived at a setup that is quite solid. And as you have seen, the higher performance you're aiming for, the more finicky it gets to find good solutions. And that is just as it is in real life as well. Bog standard turbos, not that difficult to set up. But if you want to have something special for your special cars, it gets worse. But if you are following this concept of accommodating the surroundings for your turbo first, then start with an oversized turbo, make it smaller, adjust the flows, then fine-tune the compressor map path, and then last you choose a compromise for your compression, I think you will have a much easier time setting up your turbos. And with that, I think this tutorial is done as well. I hope you enjoyed, and see you guys next time.